Welcome home to St. Anne's. We want you to know that you're welcome to join us at 10 a.m. on Sundays. Please be sure to hit subscribe to receive our sermons. We can't wait to meet you. Good morning, good morning. That's a happy gospel, isn't it? It's very Lenty, but it's Lent, so let's see what's going on here, shall we? I think this is a very, very important gospel, especially for where we are as a people. So I want us to explore it and maybe explore ourselves a little bit more in the process. And I know that's not necessarily the most comfortable thing to do, so get yourself comfy, get yourself a cup of coffee, because we're going to get real. All right. So basically what's going on here is Jesus has been going around being really, really cool. He's preaching fun things, and he's doing fun miracles, and the disciples are all together, and they're having a great time. They're going around as a group, and it's like one big frat party all the time. It's super fun. It's amazing. We're all having a great time. And then Jesus says something that is incredibly unpopular. He starts talking about how people aren't going to like us, and they might hurt us, and things are going to get really uncomfortable, and we're going to have to do things that we don't want to do. And people that we like, that we want to be liked by, they're not going to like us. In fact, sometimes they'll dislike us so much that they'll try to hurt us. And would you believe that people stop following Jesus? Yeah, he suddenly loses some of that popularity, and people are kind of dropping off. And so what was huge crowds following him around, having lots of fun together, suddenly is kind of winnowing down to a smaller group. And Peter's looking around, looking. He's like, Jesus, this sermon don't preach. And if you are, if you've ever been in seminary at all, or any time you're learning to preach, there are some things that we believe theologically that we know to be true, but we don't preach that, because that sermon just don't preach. And what Jesus is saying isn't preaching, and people do not like it. And so Peter comes and pulls him aside, and he's like, hey, Jesus, you need to stop talking like that, because people are leaving and they don't like it. So let's be a little bit more positive, maybe a little less scary, maybe not so negative. Let's fluff it up a bit here, shall we? Because we don't want people leaving. And it can seem like what Jesus says here is very, very aggressive. And I think it has to be. It has to be aggressive for him, too. Because, and you remember last week we talked about the temptations of Jesus, right? One of them is popularity and fame. And Jesus is popular and famous because of what he's doing. It makes him very, very popular. And it makes him very, very famous. It makes him well-liked. And he knows that that's a temptation. And so he has to have a strong rebuke, not just for Peter to say, knock it off, Peter, that's not what we're about, but also for himself to be reminded, no, I'm not going to get sucked into this, because that for him is a temptation. So when he says, get behind me, Satan, he's hearkening back to the fact that this is a temptation for him. So he knows that this is something that he could easily be sucked into. So he has to make a hard stop here. And that's very, very important. And I think this is something that you and I wrestle with, because we're good middle-class people in the United States. And you want to know what we like more than anything else? To be liked. Yeah. We love it. We want to be popular. And I will admit, as a clergy person, we really want to be liked, because if you're liked, then maybe your church will grow. And if maybe your church grows, then, maybe you're spreading the gospel. Or, hey, it just feels good to have a growing church. And when you're around other clergy, you can be like, yeah, my church is growing. What of it? Guess the church isn't dying after all, huh? So we can get really, really sucked into this. We all of us tend to be very, very Peter here. And I will confess to you that I had exactly this conversation last week with our vestry. Because being in the church right now is hard, right? And we're worried about things. We're worried about keeping our churches open with COVID and all the stuff going on in the world. And it's not easy. It's not an easy time to be a Christian. And I mean, let's be frank, it's never been an easy time. But a lot of us are really coming to grips with a lot of this because we don't have a lot of cushion. We don't have a lot of cushion to just be okay with whatever. And so we're having to have some really real conversations. And one of those really real conversations is, what do we do if people leave? What do we do if people don't like what we have to say and they say, never mind, I don't want to be a part of this? What do we do then? Do we soften what we say? Do we maybe not say the things that we know we ought to say? Do we preach the sermons that may not preach, but are the gospel? Or do we soften things? Do we water them down? Do we do a little bit more of the feel-good stuff? And maybe not get quite so real, because you know what? People don't like being uncomfortable, and they don't like being told that maybe we're doing things that we ought not do. So you and I, on a regular basis, struggle with being Peter. On a regular basis. Have you ever been in a conversation with somebody of a different opinion? And you could say, yeah, no, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with you talking about the undeserving poor. I don't agree with you using racist jokes. I really struggle with the fact that you are doing these things. Or are we good middle-class people and we don't want to make a big fuss and we just kind of, and let it go? What do we do? What do we do? Do we soften so that we don't say things that might offend? Or do we pronounce the gospel? What do we do? And that is a huge struggle for you and I. And I know we can justify it, right? Well, these are my coworkers, these are my friends, these are my neighbors. I don't want to upset them. We as clergy say, well, you know what? I'm not going to say those things because what if they leave? And then what do? I'm going to kill my church preaching the gospel. You're going to kill the church preaching the gospel. You're going to lose your friends because you proclaim God. That's what we're going to do. And again, if you study history, we will come across situations where we have been reminded it is not evil that ruins us. It is not the evil. Because there have always been good and evil. Always, always, always. The danger is when we say nothing at all and the evil grows. And I can quote you Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I can quote you Martin Luther King Jr. I can quote you all these fantastic people who at the very core looked to those of us living in that middle class, easy, fat, sassy life, and they said, here's the deal. Stop being the good, nice people. The good, nice people are what's killing us. Stop. You are what's feeding the evil to occur. Because evil, when it's in your face and you can recognize evil, you can call it what it is. You can name it. You know to avoid it. But when it's the good, nice, middle class feeding the evil, then suddenly it's much more insidious. And it's much more dangerous. And that is where you and I come in. Because I know we as Episcopalians don't like to be in your face, evangelical, blah, 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 spreading the gospel. And I know we, as most of us are middle class, living a fairly easy, comfortable life. And let's be honest, comfort is our number one goal. We don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to in any way risk our comforts. We are Peter. We don't want to risk the popularity, the being liked, the having fun, even if it means shushing the gospel. You and I are not called to shush the gospel. You and I are called to scream from the mountaintops the gospel. And if you saying to someone, what you just said was racist is going to risk your friendship with that person, then maybe that's something to reflect on. Maybe if you're going to make somebody uncomfortable by saying, you know what, stop making fun of poor people who are struggling, then maybe that's something to reflect on. Maybe if you're saying, you know what, storming the Capitol is wrong, and that's going to upset them, maybe that's something to reflect on. I don't know. I'm just saying the gospel's pretty clear about loving all people, treating all people with love, dignity, and respect, with proclaiming the good news in all people at all times and in all places. And if that is going to make people uncomfortable, guys, it's time to become agitators. If that is what we're talking about, it's time to proclaim the gospel and risk it all. Because as Dietrich Bonhoeffer told us in World War II, as Martin Luther King Jr. told us in the Civil Rights Movement, as folks throughout time have reminded us, as Jesus reminds Peter, get behind me. We're proclaiming the gospel here. And if you can't get on board with that, if you can't get on board with love, then maybe, just maybe, you shouldn't be on board. So I call you in those moments of discomfort, when you're so afraid of being unliked, ask yourself why. Why are we so afraid of being unliked? What is it that we really truly fear? Because I'll tell you, as a clergy person, when I went to the vestry, I was afraid about money. I was afraid that if we really truly proclaim who we are, if we truly do this, if we really truly love all people, what does that mean for our bottom line? If you're really worried that your neighbor won't like you because you said that joke was inappropriate and it wasn't funny, what is it that you're really afraid of? When we say we proclaim the gospel, we say we proclaim the gospel in all places, in all times, in all things, and in all people. Always. Not just on Sunday morning when it feels good, but always. Even when it's your coworker. Even no matter what, no matter when. So I call you today, this Lent, to really reflect on this. To reflect on what matters most to us. Our popularity, our being liked, or the gospel. Because sometimes we're called to choose. And it's not an easy choice. It has never been an easy choice. But I call you today, ask yourself, is it popularity I seek or God? We want you to know that you're welcome to join us at 10 a.m. on Sundays. Please be sure to hit subscribe to receive our sermons. We can't wait to meet you.